Hi, welcome to season 2 of Everything I've Never Said, a podcast where I talk about everything that I've been thinking about, interested in, or intrigued by. If you're looking for a platform where you can learn with me and also relate, this is the place for you. I've been wanting to change things up with this podcast for a while now, especially because when I created this specific project, I was 15 and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I needed something to distract myself from all the stress I was experiencing in the moment, and I just wanted to talk. But now I'm 18, my life has changed significantly, and I have a much better idea what content I want to work towards curating and putting out. And 10 episodes in, I am more than comfortable in front of the microphone as well. Although some would argue that that is not true because I still very much use a script. I am trying not to. I'm trying to wean off of that little safety net that I have in the form of a script. But the episodes I've been working on are all based on things that inspire me and things I'm excited to talk about. It's raining outside. It's kind of crazy. It's almost 2 a.m. and I don't know why I'm doing this at this hour, but I'm excited and I hope you enjoy listening. In this episode, I wanted to talk about the role of social media in marketing, branding, and everything in between. Because all throughout like the last year and a half, I have been very, very attentive towards the various marketing strategies emerging online, especially like on Instagram, because that's where I spend most of my time on. It's kind of embarrassing. It shouldn't be the case, but that's exactly what I do. I spend the lion's share of my time on Instagram and I consume quite a lot of content, okay? More than I should be. And I think it's very interesting to me, this realization that hit me was that social media did not just change the way we sell things to a consumer, but also it has kind of changed what we purchase and how we believe that we need a certain product in our lives. And it's kind of mind-boggling when we realize the influence a 30-second video has on our brains, and it's kind of fucked up. But all of that aside, I'm gonna dive into exactly that right now. The first thing I wanted to talk about was what marketing has been to me, what I believe the fundamental of marketing is. This is not based on any concrete research. As I said, this is just my opinion on what I think marketing is. In fact, it was this idea that even put this idea episode into my head. But for me, marketing is more about selling, not selling what you offer, but like selling what you take away from the consumer in a situation where the consumer doesn't own whatever you're selling. And I like to substantiate this by giving this example about like a body mist or a perfume. I think there's two effective ways to market a perfume to a consumer. On one hand, you could be like, this specific perfume is the best thing that you're ever going to invest your money in. It's going to make you smell amazing, floral, beautiful, whatever. It's going to attract people towards you. It's going to get you your dream job. Like all of those incriminating advertisements. I've seen so many of them at this point. That's one way to market a perfume. And for me, another way to market a perfume would be to convince the consumer that without this specific product, your life is going to be not something you'd like to live. You know, like this perfume is the key to all your problems. And if you do not have this, you're going to smell horrible. People are not going to want to be around you. I have seen both these kinds of advertisements. For me, the latter would definitely encourage me to go out and buy the product. In my opinion, when you market based on what you take away from the consumer feels this like innate, instinctual almost need to like kind of fill in the gap for the lack of what you've convinced them that they don't have. I mean, too much fear would definitely like alienate people from your product, but the right amount of it would immediately encourage them to go out and buy it, right? This could completely be off, but I think that's pretty basic. That's what I think marketing is to me. It's kind of raining and it's very distracting. So I kind of singled out and identified some of the most interesting and popular marketing strategies that I was seeing floating around on social media in the last couple months. And I'm going to dive right into them. A lot of them are actually based on like the situations I've actually seen unravel and unfold before my eyes. And The biggest one of them is companies using fear as a psychological tool. Now, I think the most basic fundamental of marketing is that you need to target the consumer's fear of something and something in order to encourage them to buy the product. And a lot of companies target a very specific fear of ours, and that is our fear of missing out. What made me realize this was the 2024 Stanley Cup situation, where this interestingly shaped reusable water bottle was so crazy in demand that people were running in stores. There were stampedes. They are kind of expensive when you compare them to a standard reusable water bottle, but people were crazy. They wanted it at any cost, and there were genuine communities and accessories designed around a bottle. That is, that's not practical in any form or way. Especially when you come to realize that there's not many things distinguishable about this tumbler. Like, it does the same thing as any standard price water bottle would. And there were several alternatives available online that looked like the cup, that had the same structure as the cup, but did not have the logo on it. So why is that this specific cup, this particular brand, was so aggressively in demand? There could be many explanations for this, but for me, I think the biggest explanation is that this is the community that we have created. There's a community around these cups, or the subculture that the internet has formed surrounding them. So may that be in the form of what I drink in a day videos, or may that be in the form of how I accessorize my Stanley to go on a morning walk, which sounds very dystopian when I say it out loud. But it is the subculture that the internet has formed that has caused people to hurriedly acquire copious amounts of them. And when I think about this from a psychological perspective, to the consumer, it's like, okay, I have a Stanley Cup, okay? I am automatically a part of this community of all the other girls or guys or whoever has it. And without one, I fear missing out. Logically, you will not be ostracized from society just because you do not own a water bottle, but psychologically, social media, especially this community of aspirational TikTok, has kind of homogenized our views on what the ideal life looks like. And we all as human beings chase this feeling of feeling like we belong, the feeling of being in group. And having products that we see our fellow human beings using, upholding, and advertising makes us feel like we have an obligation towards them to be a part of that community. And I think that is what was really behind this entire culture around TikTok, where this ideal life and the idea of owning a certain kind of water bottle was so intertwined. When you hear it out loud, it sounds insane, but these things happen in the background of our minds without ever realizing it. The company too took very great advantage of the situation. They immediately recognized what was happening and the psychological aftermath of whatever this crazy demand hike was, and they ensured that everyone's favorite influencer worth millions of dollars owns a Stanley. And when that happens, you naturally want one as well. It managed to get promoted by hundreds of online content creators with a huge audience, triple their revenue, and they quickly became the next quote-unquote it girl staple. To me, what's very interesting about this is that a Stanley doesn't directly fit the impermeable charmed circle of rich people's stuff, because it's not $100,000 worth. It's even though it's relatively more expensive than your average dollar store water bottle, it still isn't as out of reach as all the other things we see aspirational influencers have, like an apartment, the rent of which is more than your yearly income, right? And it's this very feeling of inclusion, to have something that the people you aspire to become have, to feel more like them, that we chase. And this causes people to buy, collect, promote, rinse and repeat. Another really interesting way a lot of sellers kind of market their product or themselves on social media, and this is my least favorite one subjectively, is by having a quote-unquote story. Preferably one that is enough to either make you cry or feel incredibly guilty for not crying. And I like to call this guilt marketing or engagement bait, for the lack of a better word. I don't think this is the official term, but oh my god, the amount of this specific thing I come across on social media is actually kind of crazy, especially in the last year or so. It's taken off like anything, and it's kind of gotten to me in a bad way. Because I do get that we have sentimental reasons all the time to start a small business or a brand. And it's actually very cool to me when, like, our human tendency to want to reciprocate makes us and leads us to want to purchase from these very businesses. It's very beautiful to see companies and brands emerge out of honest reasoning, genuine appreciation for a cause, for a matter, for a product, and not just the capitalist agenda of making a lot of money. But I definitely think that this is a double edged sword because it's so easy to misuse this kind of marketing strategy. Because I think it can quickly fall into disfavor amongst the consumer. The consumer could, and I find myself heavily intrigued by these brands, but at the same time, if that becomes your only selling point, if these quote unquote sob stories or backstories are your only reason to sell a product or to create a product, the consumer may fall out of favor with you anytime they feel like they're being manipulated into acts of sale or purchase. Because even though it feels nice to have these products be sold and these stories to exist, and every product you create have a sentimental reasoning behind it, and it may even encourage the consumer to purchase something they don't even need at the moment just for the sake of the cause, it's definitely impractical to expect them to continue doing so repeatedly in the long run, especially when your quality or your prices aren't justified. And in my own personal experience, as well as the experience of a lot of people that I've seen consuming these products and people who comment about these products after having used them, this is the case. The quality is often not justified and the story becomes the major selling point. From a branding decision, from a marketing decision, I don't think that that's a very good business decision in the long run, because brands are kind of built on repetitive customers and loyalty. And a lack of that would definitely be very harmful for your brand image and for your profits. And of course, from a consumer point of view, I find it kind of annoying to have to listen to the same story over and over again and not have the product justify all of the hard work that went into its creation. Another very interesting turn guilt marketing takes, it's kind of like a more sensitive aspect of it, and this is also taken off in crazy amounts in 2024. And I noticed this when I came across a lot of content on Instagram which was asking for like likes, comments, shares, follows. And this wasn't because they were selling some product, but they wanted it for a cause. It was more of like a fundraising, fund generating situation where they wanted it for surgery or covering education costs. Now, I know that these people aren't exactly looking to sell something on a repetitive basis, so this isn't directly under the umbrella of marketing. But there is definitely a money motive behind it, which may be completely genuine. So I guess it's somewhat fair to put this under that category, especially because I don't see it fitting in anywhere else. And this content, if I had to explain it in a pretty standard way, would be something like, if you like my post once, if you comment on it 3 times, and if you share it to 4 people, you could help pay for my dog's surgery or something of that sort. These are very genuine, painful things that I don't think anybody deserves to go through. But at the same time, again, from a very kind of practical point of view, it kind of annoys me and it causes some apathy in me. And I hope it wasn't just me, because then that would just mean I'm a horrible person and none of this has any other realistic basis. And, truth be told, disclaimer, tragedy can strike anyone, and the average person from the working class cannot always be equipped to deal with it to the best of their ability, especially alone. And when all else fails, the power of social media is a quick and effective way to get help. And I get that. But from a very honest and practical point of view, it's actually hard to get the money you're looking for through just these means, solely through your likes and shares. And that is because the revenue model of these apps is actually built on, number one, consistent high viewership. It's built on engagement, subscriptions, and largely on brand deals. So one isolated TikTok or reel getting 150 million views and a billion likes or whatever, that's kind of an exaggeration, but yeah, wouldn't generate you that kind of money. Even if you wanted to, it can't. It's thundering so bad. It's understandable, really, that like a lack of knowledge could be the reason why people take to such measures, because I don't expect the average person to be very well aware of Instagram's or TikTok's revenue model. But at the same time, I think that it's so much better and so much more beneficial to kind of start like an online donation link or a GoFundMe or something of that sort, or a petition, whatever it is the cause that you're fighting for. That would be such a more tangible and effective way to deal with or to generate the kind of resources you need, rather than put the pressure on the individual consumer to interact with your content a certain number of times beyond their convenience and beyond their understanding. Because the amount of guilt it generates in that viewer for not doing this all the time, because you can't watch every second reel that appears on your explore page times. You can't comment on it 8 times. It's not possible. It's not really something you want to do, because you watch this content for leisure, right? And it's such an unnecessary chore for the viewer as well, because they really cannot change much. And that's kind of all they can do in this regard, is kind of just push your content forward to a larger viewer base. Another really interesting thing I've seen on social media in this past year is the use of satire. And it's actually so fascinating. This is actually the most fascinating thing to me in this episode. It is how, like, these social factors, such as your consumer base, can cause you to completely shift your approach to selling what you sell. Because the same product is being sold in completely different ways as compared to right now and 20 years ago, even though the product remains the same, the qualities remain the same, the features and maybe even the pricing remains the same. And I think this rise in satire in marketing is heavily associated with this increase in the share of Gen Z in the consumer pool. Because now Gen Z has all grown up. Some of them have even started to make their own money and make their own financial decisions. And as a consequence, the marketing teams of every single brand out there have now to learn how to target these consumers, this demographic. And we are infamously the unserious generation. We are appealed through to memes, vines, jokes, and satire content with sometimes complex undertones. It's actually a really beneficial idea for these brands realistically to like take to their social media platforms with humorous content, because that's where most of the millennial and Gen Z folk, which are also the largest share of consumers in the consumer pool right now, spend the lion's share of their time. I personally use social media to watch the content I like, I find amusing, I find funny, whatever. And if you ask me to open Instagram and watch a bunch of ads for different products, my answer would never be yes, you know? And I would immediately reject that proposition. Like, no, thank you, I don't care. I don't want to watch your ads. This is for my leisure. But think about it this way: if I'm scrolling through my explore page, reels, whatever, and I come across the advertisements disguised as the very content I like, in this case being satire, memes, humor, trends, you better believe I'm watching it. And that is, in theory, it sounds so simple, but it took these brands years to come to the realization that satire is actually a tool in their hands. And that's kind of transformed the way these brands work, and I've seen that happen in real time in front of me. This is also again a double-edged sword, and I don't think that every brand should take to humor or jokes as their main marketing standpoint, even though it looks very appealing from a distance. Because, again, when I think of a fast food chain, it makes sense for me to expect them to post unserious, easy on the ice content. Because, like, fast food is associated with, like, these archetypes of convenience, of relatability, and something feeling in your reach. And this can come to very easily connect with the archetypes in these forms of marketing, which are a lack of seriousness. Anyone can afford McDonald's. Anyone can watch a meme. No fast food consumer chain takes themselves too seriously, so why should their advertisements? It logically falls in line. You would expect them to do that. And that consonance that these sort of marketing trends create in the mind of the consumer is very beneficial to them. But at the same time, I have seen political parties do that. And that's, to me, it's weird. At least it happens in my country. It's something I've seen happening for a long time now, especially in the last 2 or 3 years. And I find it to be a fallacy of sorts, because those are serious law and policy making institutions, right? And I get it that in the short run, it may be a good, like, sarcastic play on whatever political, economic situation is going on in the country. In the long run, it kind of does harm their image as like relevant, important, respectful organizations. So while it would make sense for a brand that sells kids' toys or fast food to make satire interesting content, I wouldn't expect a political party or an NGO to do that, because that would kind of be, it could be something that would leave a bad taste in the mouth of many, many people. I mean, it has in mine for a long time now. And I guess it's very important for these brands at that point to recognize whether what they are selling is in consonance with how they're selling it, and whether that would create dissonance in the consumer's mind or the opposite. Another really efficient way to kind of like market yourself is through the illusion of scarcity, which is very paradoxical to me, but the moment I realized it, it made so much sense and it was kind of like a eureka moment. I would say that this feeling of scarcity is a very interesting tool to profit off of. I wouldn't say it's a direct marketing strategy, but it's definitely a way to siphon off more profit off of whatever you're selling, because you're selling a larger volume of it when you're convincing the consumer that there exists a lack of it. It's kind of messed up when you say like that, but the first bullets in the barrel of scarcity are the infamous limited editions, edit, archival products, and celebrity collaborations. I would personally come in here and say that it's kind of getting old now. The market is oversaturated with things like these. I mean, I don't see the point in having every single brand create every single product with a celebrity where their contribution is probably close to zero. And McDonald's, I'm talking to you. There's no reason you need to have a meal for every actor, celebrity, or fictional fantasy character that's ever existed. It's just chicken nuggets. It's not that deep. But the sense of urgency that's created by the awareness of the fact that there's only a very small amount of something available for a very short time, and once it's sold out, it may never come back in stock for all time to come. This gives like the consumer little to no time to actually pay some mind to where this product in question would fit in their life, and whether even there exists a need for it, or if there's a utility for this product anywhere. They buy it before they think about it, and the next thing you know, it's gone, it's sold out, it's not there, potentially forever, and it's not coming back. And that is where your fear of missing out strikes again. That's pretty interesting, and I definitely think that that's caused like these ideas of selling out and this whole brand image thing to go crazy. But there's a very interesting perspective on this that I came to know about through a case study I did on luxury brands. And I quote, taking into consideration the fact that they essentially rely on their allure, the enigma and mystique of something being in the reach of only a very few is what drives their brand image as one that is serious, something that is worth having. Not many of us can afford to drop tens or thousands on a handbag, but then again, we are not the demographic that these brands target. They run on aspiration and are presented to the common folk as status symbols, a sign that you have acquired something that most people can't, and perhaps never will, the ability to spend for luxury and not for utility. However, a recent upsurge in the visibility of these brands on red carpets and influencer wardrobes have somewhat deluded these brands of the image of that scarcity. These items are everywhere. They are on red carpets, fashion weeks, shopping halls, and the average consumer seems to have reached a saturation point. The allure, the lack, and the fear of missing out no longer exists in their minds. Products are out in stores in large numbers before they are even shown on the runways. Don't get me wrong, people would still spend an arm and a leg on something like an expensive high-end handbag just for the brand, but it is no longer what it used to be. Quote ends. This is a very interesting thing that I discovered, that now people have lost the interest that they used to have in brands at some point because they have gotten rid of the idea of scarcity. They have kind of undone that illusion that they created for so long in the hope of increasing profit. That's just an assumption. However, it's kind of interesting to me how paradoxical this is, how scarcity is the reason that they are selling a larger volume of this, And I've also kind of heard about like these brands using a lot of fraudulent tactics to convince the consumers that there exists less of something than there actually is, by creating fake sellout situations and restocking products constantly while convincing the consumer that that's not going to happen. I have no clue why I'm speaking so fast. But yes, this was the most interesting thing to me about marketing that I discovered while I was researching for this episode. This brings me to the next section of this episode: branding and social media. Brands quite literally rule our lives, okay, and every single product we buy is somewhat influenced by the brand, the label of which it bears. The same product, in fact, could be sold for two vastly different prices, and the only thing that justifies a higher price could be the brand that is perceived as high end. And just like me, this may cause you to think that the doctrine of brand names is rooted in capitalism, which it is, but it's not the worst thing to happen to mankind. Okay, the perception around brands that exists right now around me and on social media is that it justifies daylight robbery in the name of luxury, which to a huge extent right now is true. But a little bit of research on the Soviet Union kind of changed my perspective on why brands are important, because it's not all black and white, right? There is a huge importance that the regime of branding has today, which is why it was considered necessary to create it. We find that in the Soviet Union, quote unquote, the state control over every single commodity was so high and private companies weren't allowed to exist. Every single good would falter in quality, bread would be of stale variety, the parts of ships would be poorly made, causing hundreds of them to sink. And because all of these similar goods would be grouped as product categories and not brand categories, they all had a common label, which meant that there was no way to identify what producing unit sold what and hold them responsible for the lack of production quality standards. Quote ends. I think brands bring you accountability. You can't now sell rotten produce or bread or ship parts, because now there's a clear label on who's producing it, right? And who is accountable for any capital or personal loss as a consequence of product usage. It kind of creates the system of what I like to call market democracy, because the brands too in turn now know that they will completely lose consumers and the market base if they fail to meet the standards of quality prevailing in the market or expected by the consumer. And hence, they will not resort to production shortcuts, because it comes at the cost of their very existence. For the business too, I think having like a brand identity is very important, because right now, in the moment, there's so much saturation in the market, because everybody can sell, everybody can promote, everybody can create. And from what the consumer wants today is uniqueness, originality, they want inspiration. And the existence of multiple alternatives kind of leave manufacturers in this state where they're so vulnerable to being replaced, because, well, a name in the consumer market will offer them a say, it will offer them an influence and loyalty. Your brand is what the consumer identifies you with. And, there's a lot of examples in history that would prove this. I mean, FaceTiming is now called Skyping somebody. I'll Uber to my friend's place is considered what we call booking an e-taxi. To Venmo someone means to transfer them money online. That is what a brand is. It's a sense of synonymity. And the impact of social media on branding too is very two-sided. On one hand, a visual set of content can definitely help create a brand identity, because it helps you incorporate visual elements, and human beings are increasingly drawn to that. Now that they have access to that in the palm of their hands in the form of a smartphone, it's very accessible to you to create a brand identity, because you don't have to go through the huge investment of billboards, advertising online, advertising on televisions, and all of those old ways, right? But at the same time, the success of a brand on social media depends on the traction and engagement that it's getting, which is often determined algorithmically, right? Which means that social media algorithms not only push forward content which is similar, but also content that follows trends and is repetitively repetitive. It is next to impossible to build yourself a brand, in my opinion, if you constantly have to conform to restrictive social media trends. Because on one hand, you need to be unique to create a brand for yourself. And on the other hand, you need to follow every trend prevailing in the social media market to be able to have a better shot at getting seen by a larger share of consumers, which is very ironic. And I think a lot of these restrictive social media trends may or may not even be in line for the brand image you wish to create. But at the same time, maybe once you do create a community, you're free to do whatever, and this is just collateral in that situation. But I think if I'm talking from the perspective of a consumer, it is incredibly tiring to be chased by the same kind of content in different forms, because it takes away from the authenticity of it all, and it like nothing stands out to the consumer. Everything is just a huge blur of the same trends being followed in different fonts by different people selling different things, but none of them appeal to you because none of them are actually focusing on the genuine selling points of products. Nothing is memorable, nothing excites them, and so they don't interact, which kind of defeats the purpose of marketing and branding alike. I would go as far as to say that the permeation of like artificial intelligence in marketing and branding would create somewhat of a similar effect, because generative AI it's trained on existing content models, and the information it essentially uses is partially recycled from the same kind of strategies, content, and pattern that already exists. As a result, what it will spew out will also be repetitive in nature and repetitive in pattern. Not unless there is a greater right brain creative involvement in the area of marketing. I won't comment on whether that should be human input or artificial intelligence input. Can marketing and branding be in the new age of social media truly unique? Because uniqueness is what the consumer will chase at this point in the journey of marketing we have seen so far. If every brand is following the same kind of content strategy and the same kind of posting pattern and regime, well, who is going to stand out? Who is going to be a brand? And I guess now more than ever, the role of social media and marketing is instrumental, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10, 15 years, marketing completely shifts to social media, as the time we have been spending on social media has been increasing exponentially in the last couple years. That would kind of be very dystopian, but it's also very, very likely, which brings me to the next topic in this episode. The consequences of social media on marketing are far-reaching, because now that we have talked so much about how they are obviously interconnected, but today we also find that the easy access of social media is a weapon in the hands of brands to feed unsuspecting consumers with large amounts of goods that they don't need and never will. The TikTok culture of morning shreds, hauls, get ready with me's, push forth this tendency to overconsume and always want more than what is needed. Now, obviously, that has adverse impacts on our finances and the environment, but it also affects our sense of fulfillment and our self-esteem, of course. Because I don't think that constantly coming across people using thousands worth of skincare will do anyone's self-confidence any good, and they will find themselves consistently feeling like they're not doing enough, even when they're probably doing more than they need to. Of course, there's a cosmetic, medical aspect to this too, where everybody's being pushed the same kind of skincare and the same type of makeup and the same type of products, regardless of the individual differences that we all have in our biological and genetic makeup. That is a very practical perspective. The same kind of skincare that's making your favorite content creator have the best skin you could ever imagine would probably cause a breakout for you because your skin type and your genetic history is different. And of course, this homogenization of what we think we should purchase has a negative impact on people who cannot afford all of these things that social media is constantly pushing on them. When brands capitalize off of these situations, they kind of create newer insecurities in the process as well, causing people to nitpick unnoticeable and honestly natural flaws. Well, not even flaws, because aging is just a rite of passage. It's not even a flaw. But the anti-aging culture on social media is so widespread and so vast and so ingrained into the minds of people that they don't even realize that they are constantly interacting with content that pushes that idea. Anti-aging stuff, wrinkles, or I don't know, textured skin. These are genuine, normal human things that we all go through that are not even flaws. These are just things that happen to all of us. And the fact that we have now been convinced that these are things that we are supposed to change or prevent or somehow fix is kind of insane, but we all find ourselves believing this, myself included. Like, I have found myself to nitpick these things, and I'm sure others have too. Because once brands convince you that there's something wrong with your literal natural state of existence, they obviously will do nothing but to now sell you a solution to this. And that is more and more and more and more of unnecessary stuff you do not need, never did, never will. Before you know it, you have 15 different kinds of sunscreens and 37 different variations of Stanleys. And then your dermatologist tells you that sunscreens are actually the worst thing you can put on your face for your skin type. Yes, that is my personal life experience. Anyway, another consequence of increasing branding is perhaps the brand polarization, where the value of a product is not determined by relevant factors like usefulness, quality, its life, or features, but merely the name of the company producing it. It kind of ties back to the whole social media trend following pattern that every brand now has to follow to be able to create a marketable consumer base. However, I also find myself watching advertisements that push in your faces huge public figures or archetypes and anchors that are trending on social media and nothing else. Like, tell me what the product does, okay? Market the product, not the brand. But there is now polarization when it comes to brand names and identities. And I think social media, along with its influencer and promotion culture, has actively created this capitalist pool and this mirage where we chase what we see, what others have. We have access to socioeconomic circles that we did not have any proximity to before. And the constant comparing of lifestyles, it kind of just pushes forth this idea that brands create products and not the other way around. I think what I've just talked about for the last whatever indefinite amount of minutes is just that marketing and branding on social media is now the new age system, the new age regime. Right now in the moment, and only increasingly in the next couple years, every brand is going to be chasing a social media marketing campaign, is going to be chasing a large amount of followers and a loyal consumer base that interacts with their content and pushes them to new people regularly. And in this scenario, the responsibility actually comes down to the consumer to an extent as well, to not fall for what I would controversially call the propaganda of these companies, because they create problems that do not exist and sell you solutions that you do not need, obviously. But at the same time, it's also important for these brands to be able to carve out an identity for themselves, to not fall in the vicious trap of creating content that only creates engagement but does not create consumers. And I definitely think that AI is going to be a very important driving force in the field of marketing in the next maybe 3 years, considering the way it's evolving, and an increased right brain involvement in the creation of artificial intelligence content is definitely going to be better for the consumers and hopefully better for the producers. Anyway, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed piecing it together. It was a result of a million YouTube videos that I randomly decided to watch on this specific niche, and a result of a TED Talk I watched about AI in marketing. It's very interesting. I don't have any other information on it because I have kind of forgotten all about it. I wrote this episode on a plane, back from the city I'm going to spend the next 4 years or more of my life in. Life goes on, and it's beyond the capitalist social media agenda all around you. Take this as your reminder to not fall for the next heatless curl tutorial that requires you to buy 50 different kind of products, which would frankly be more expensive than a hair curling device. The next morning shed you see on Instagram. I don't know, whatever you come across. My explore page is kind of fucked up, but yeah. This was Lakshita from Everything I've Never Said. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.